Hello everyone, today I'm going to be doing my video essay on Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood, which looks like this. And running with the theme of cats, I am wearing my little cat pocket shirt, and I was going to do cat eye makeup, but I just realized the other day that I left all my makeup at home over spring break, so we're just going to have to do with one of my numerous cat shirts. I'm actually going to start off by saying a little bit about the author, Margaret Atwood. She is currently in her 80s. She's been writing for decades. She actually published Cat's Eye in the 1980s, even though she started working on it much earlier. She is a successful Canadian writer who has explored many different forms of writing. So she's done short stories, poems, essays, all the way up to children's books, and Cat's Eye is a full-length novel about 450 pages, so it's even on the longer side. And Cat's Eye is a story of a female artist's life experiences, largely consisting of flashbacks of her troubled childhood, which was full of bullying at the hands of girls she considered to be her best friends. This novel is considered to be Margaret Atwood's most autobiographical because there's a lot of parallels between Elaine Risley's life, who was the main character of Cat's Eye, to Margaret Atwood's life, even though she hasn't really come out and confirmed this yet. This novel is really just bursting at the seams with prominent themes that include bullying, abuse, art, death, memories, time. There's a lot about gender roles and religion, and there's a lot of dreams that happen in the book. And I'm just going to focus on the themes that interested me the most while I was reading. So I'm just going to focus primarily on the idea of time, bullying, gender roles, and I really want to discuss how the title of the story is significant to the content of the story. One of the reoccurring themes in this novel is time. It was actually the first theme that I picked up on as I was reading it because of how often the main character brings it up in her dialogue, but also the way in which the novel is constructed. It does not follow a chronological order, and in one part of the book, you will be experiencing Elaine's childhood, and then it will skip to her as an adult, and then back to her childhood, and maybe to her in her middle aged years. Because of these jumps in time, the reader really gets to know Elaine as a person or a character because we get to see all the bullying she went through in her childhood and how traumatic that was and its effect on her later in life. We get to see her with her first serious boyfriend, her first husband, which ended up being a failing marriage. We get to see her reaction to her brother's premature death, who she was very close to as a child, and her mother's death of old age. Because she moved around so frequently as a child, Elaine Risley didn't really have any friends other than her brother until she finally lived in a house where she stayed long enough to make friends. And this is where she meets her first friends, Grace and Carol, but it's not until she goes on this long vacation and comes back to see that they've kind of replaced her with a third girl named Cordelia. And to give a little summary of the kind of girl Cordelia is, I'm going to use a quote written by Margot Fragoso, who is a writer for NPR. And in her article, Teen Girls, Mean Girls, A Tale of Karmic Revenge, she describes Cordelia really well. And I'm just going to read that quote. Quote, although she is only 9, Cordelia plays vicious emotional mind games and conducts rituals that resemble hazing, like telling Elaine to stand out in the freezing cold for hours. And that's just really one of the examples of the torment that Cordelia puts Elaine throughout the narrative of this story. Elaine also recalls other horrific childhood events, such as being buried alive by her friends, being taunted to the point where she resorts to self-harm in the form of peeling skin off of her feet. And all this is happening while her every move and every action is being reported back to Cordelia by Grace and Carol. And the reader will really find themselves being frustrated with Elaine after she deals with all this bullying because she constantly tries to justify her friends' actions. She takes their abuse and interprets it as support. And it's not until the ravine scene in which Elaine almost freezes to death while trying to retrieve a hat that Cordelia threw that the power really begins to shift between them. And this is the first few times in the book where we see Elaine being defiant and sticking up to her bullies in the novel. And after the ravine scene, Elaine seems to have an epiphany about the way she's been treated and decides to turn the tables on Cordelia and the other two girls by being defiant and not listening to their opinions on her anymore. And throughout the rest of the novel, the reader sees Cordelia becoming more of the pleasant, nice person as Elaine kind of descends into the bully role that Cordelia once held. It's actually not until page 256 that Elaine realizes that they've kind of switched roles, or the first time she admits it. And it's not until they're either older teenagers or young adults. But Elaine says, Cordelia wants to point out lump lump family cars, but I'm tired of this. I have a denser, more malevolent little triumph to finger. Energy has passed between us, and I am stronger. And after this point, the roles are reversed, even though Cordelia still brings up fond memories of her childhood, where she's really just trying to remind Elaine of the bullying that happened, but Elaine realizes that she's kind of in the bully position now and doesn't allow Cordelia to bask in those memories so much anymore. And I don't think I was the only reader who was kind of shocked by this. It was definitely a plot twist. And it goes even further when Cordelia becomes mentally unstable and she attempts suicide and she kind of confides in Elaine. And even though Elaine now has this information that Cordelia is so weak and is kind of reaching out to her when in need of a friend, Elaine kind of just brushes it off and doesn't take it seriously, which I think is also really revealing about her and the long-term effects of bullying that are just kind of embedded in her personality at this point. Although the themes of time and bullying are very present in Cat's Eye and kind of happen throughout the entire story, I personally felt like the commentary on gender roles in the novel was equally important and interesting because Elaine is unbiased at the point where she makes most of her observations about the differences she sees in the way boys act and girls act and the way they're treated and expected to function, I guess. Pages 110 and 111 are where Elaine makes her observations while she's looking at the schoolyard, kind of for the first time and noticing how gender roles affect her peers. And on page 110, she remarks, these clumps of whispering girls with their spools and colored wool tails have to do with boys, with the separateness of boys. Each cluster of girls excludes some other girls, but all boys. The boys exclude us too, but their exclusion is active. They make a point of it. We don't need to. And this image is juxtaposed with Elaine's observation on boys, which happens on the following page, as she comments, boys pride themselves on their drab clothing, their drooping socks, their smeared and inky skin. Dirt for them is almost as good as wounds. They work at acting like boys. They call each other by their last names and draw attention to any extra departures from cleanliness. And she concludes the reflection with, there always seem to be more of them in the room than there actually are. And just with these two quotes, I feel like Elaine has discovered how many aspects of gender roles affect children at this young of an age. I believe they're all 9 at this point. And first of all, she describes girls as whispering. She brings that up, I believe, 4 times in the sentences she has about the way she observes the girls in the schoolyard. And in contrast, she notes that boys seem to be as loud as possible, and not only is that acceptable, it seems expected of them. And going along with the theme of exclusion that she notices that boys are more upfront about what they want in general, and she understands that this is something that girls, especially her age, have not been conditioned to do, that girls kind of keep to themselves and whisper, and if they have conflicts, it's not really acceptable to just come out right and say it, because that's more of what boys do and not what girls are conditioned to do. And I just think it's really interesting that Elaine, even at the age of 9, sees that all these learned gestures kind of stem from the way we're taught to act during our childhood. So over the course of however long she's observing these children in the schoolyard, she has learned what's okay for each gender to do, the fact that she isn't really like the other girls because she kind of grew up with her brother as her best friend and read comic books and did boy things, and she's just now realizing, just looking at this schoolyard, that things aren't the way she thought they were previously. And to move on to the title of the book, I just thought this part was fascinating because when I originally read through it, every time anything about cat's eye, which is actually a marble, was brought up, I didn't really see the significance of the content of the book relating to the title. But it's because of the game of marbles, which is played multiple times in the book, is this game where the object is to hit someone else's marble with your marble out of this ring, which is usually drawn of chalk. And it's significant because that's kind of what we see with this struggle for power between Elaine and Cordelia, that when Elaine leaves originally on that vacation and she comes back and Cordelia has kind of taken her spot, especially as the dominant one in the group of friends, and Elaine eventually successfully knocks Cordelia out of this group of friends when they grow older, but also Cordelia goes through a lot of hardships with her mental health and clearly doesn't really care about the catty games at that point. But I thought it was just really interesting how that game, which is also played in the book, is a metaphor for the way these girls are acting and kind of how they're conditioned to act. And I just thought that marble game metaphor was just really, really perfect for the content of this story, because I don't think most people equate competition with female friendships, even though in toxic female friendships like the one portrayed in this book, there is a lot of competition and backstabbing and not so much loving and supporting as good friends are supposed to do. I wanted to end this video essay by telling you who I would recommend this book to now that I've read it and I've discussed it with multiple people and written an essay about it. And I guess I would recommend it to specifically anyone who's been bullied. I don't really think this book is bad for a certain group of people because it sheds light on tough topics like bullying, but especially to parents with young daughters and people who have been bullied, because they could obviously relate to this book, and parents with young daughters could see the possible issues they might have to face with that they've had a daughter as opposed to a son. Even though this book was written in the 1980s, I believe that a lot of the content is still relevant because there's obviously a bullying problem still in our society today, but also the negative effects of gender roles that they can have on females and males. I would also recommend this story to anyone who has been in a toxic relationship or has any toxic relationships with friends. Toxic relationships are ones that are full of abuse and manipulation, but the victim just kind of interprets this mistreatment as love and support, as Elaine does before she stands up to Cordelia. And as the reader reads through Cat's Eye, I just feel like anyone who hasn't had a toxic relationship doesn't really understand why Elaine goes through all this torment and justifies her abuser's actions as being good friends. So I think it's really gives some insight to how a victim in a toxic relationship feels and the way they think, and that they might not even identify what is happening to them as abuse. So I think it could also be used as an educational novel. And lastly, and probably fairly obviously, I would recommend this book to anyone who's been bullied or anyone who is close to someone who is dealing with bullying issues. This novel also gives a really great perspective on what bullies go through to become bullies, I guess would be a good description, because Elaine obviously takes on the bully role after Cordelia torments her, but she kind of just keeps that attribute with her for the rest of her life, and it just kind of sheds a light on the fact that people who torment you when you're younger can have a very long-lasting effect on your life and the way you are when you grow up. And just anyone in general who just wants a really good read, I think that the way this book is written and all the things that happen to Elaine and the way she changes make her not a very likable character, because she ended up being a bully and obviously didn't learn from anything that happened to her when she was younger. But she is a very realistic character, and this is something that I believe could happen in real life, and I recommend this book highly.